but first I have some slides here I wanted to talk through. And, my main focus is music. Obviously, I make electronic music. But I think these principles apply more generally. They apply to, can apply to design, architecture, visual art, any kind of art practice where you can create some kind of system for making things, I would say. Okay. So yeah, and again, augmented creativity, it started out, as I said, more of a technical thing, but it's not just like technological augmentation. It's also, it can be like habits and processes for ways to enhance your creativity. So it's a little more open-ended than I had originally planned. But okay, so the first problem, is not enough time. So I used to make music, electronic music, in a traditional way, in a digital audio workstation, a DAW, drawing in notes on the piano roll, drawing envelopes, parameters. I'd spend hours and hours and hours on a given track. I'd grow to hate it because I've heard it so many times, and it took a lot of time. It was tedious sometimes. But then I had kids, and so I didn't have time to make music anymore, basically. And so I had to find some way, but I really, it's very important to me. I had to find some way to make music. So I started improvising with my friend Jeremy. He's a singer, a piano player, he plays guitar. He's just one of these people that can, music just comes out of him. And so we just got together and started improvising. At first I just had just a very simple setup with some effects, and I would route him through my effects, and I would have some knobs, and I would control the effects, and that was pretty much it. And so it started out very basic, but what I started to do there was to develop like a system or a template so that I wasn't starting from scratch every time. So that's kind of the idea here, is that instead of opening up a blank sheet of paper or just opening up your DAW, whatever you're using, Ableton, FL Studio, Max MSP, to a blank page, I found that it helped a lot to create a system or a template so you're not starting from scratch every time, because then as you learn things, you can build that into the system. So that's what I mean by reify your knowledge, basically meaning that as you figure things out and as you learn things, you build it into you bake it in. So now you don't have to remember that every time. Because we're humans, we're fallible, we forget things. I mean, yeah, you can make checklists or whatever if you want, but there's a lot to remember. And if you're starting from scratch, you're always going to forget something. It takes longer, it's slower. This way, if you have some kind of system that you can work with, it's much faster and it's much more fun. So, like when I would sit down with my friend Jeremy and make music, it was instant gratification. We'd sit down, we'd play, we'd record it, and then at the end of the night, I had like an album's worth of new music to listen to. I'm not slaving over this stuff for hours and hours and hours and growing to hate it. It made music a lot more fun again, because you just sit down and out it comes, and and then it's kind of it's a joy to go listen to it later. It's like, well, what happened here? Like, what, you can kind of hear it with fresh ears. And again, when you kind of bake it into your system, it frees up your brain to focus on other things. It's like, okay, that's taken care of. So now I can think in more creative ways because I'm not dealing with the resonance of this filter or something like that, or getting the right high pass or the reverb set just right or whatever, because that's all taken care of. That's like baked into the system. So that's like the first one. Second problem is that there's too many options. If you I want to show you something. So this is really tiny. So I use Reaper as like my main host for the audio engine, but let me show you on this one. There's just like any synth or anything you use, it has. This is called Surge. It's a synth that I really like. It's free and open source now, so you can go download it and play with it. But I mean, you can see, there's so many parameters. I have so many plugins here. This is the plugin chain here, just for this one bass channel. There's so many parameters, so many effects, or plugins that you can use. So this is what I was looking for. So like this is just for this one channel, like all the parameters that you could control. Right? It's insane. There's just too many possibilities, and it becomes overwhelming, right? Like, what do I do? How do I work with this? And there's this great. I was going to quote it here, but I wanted to quote the whole article, so I left it out. But there's this great article by Brian Eno in Wired magazine from years ago. I think it's called Revenge of the Intuitive, which I recommend checking that out. And he kind of laments this problem that with electronic music, there's just too many options, and you can't really get a handle on it. You can't get good at it. You can't practice with it. You can't develop, muscle memory for it, because it's just there's just too much, and there's too many possibilities and too many options. So this is a problem that how do we deal with this in electronic music and in art in general? Again, this can apply to visual stuff too. Like there's open up, I don't know, Illustrator, Photoshop, or processing is a programming language for visual stuff. There's so many possibilities. It's just overwhelming. So, and the idea here is that you kind of have to make some hard choices, right? You have to decide and define what your instrument is going to be. You have to choose which parameters are important to me, and then and which ones are the most expressive for the kind of art that I want to make. And you kind of have to give yourself constraints in that way, and just forget about the rest of it. Like actually, I had this image come to mind, so I made a little drawing, which I'll explain. So, like this kind of represents this really complex thing, right? There's like so many possibilities of things you can grab and move and tweak and turn or whatever. It's like this hugely complex thing. But if you develop a system and you choose your controls, like here in this example, there's 5 knobs, right? So I've kind of abstracted away all of this complexity so that you only have to focus on these 5 knobs and what they do, right? And when you do that, then you start to have an instrument, basically, that you can start to play, that you can start to get good at. You can figure out what combinations work and which don't, and it's more manageable. You've abstracted away all the stuff on this side, right? All you have to deal with is this. So it's much more, it's easier to get a grasp on. and as you practice with this, you can get better at it. And as I said before, you start to develop this kind of muscle memory for it, where where it's no longer like up in your head and your conscious mind choosing and directing what to do, but it becomes almost automatic and more bodily and intuitive, where you can start, you can do things without even thinking about them, because you have your instrument and you've practiced it and you know how it works. And essentially here, again, this example, what you're doing is creating, I like to think in terms of possibility space. Okay, so in this case, and you can envision it like a three-dimensional possibility space. It's easy to envision. In this case, it's a five-dimensional possibility space, right? Each of these knobs has a range, and you can kind of imagine it as a five-dimensional space, and you can explore that by trying different combinations and things like that, which just put that concept in your mind, because we'll come back to that, but of the possibility space. But the other thing I wanted to point out here, you may have noticed that some of these knobs control more than one thing. And this is something I do a lot, where a single knob, a single control is controlling multiple aspects of the system at once. So, and it may not be that they're all linear. Or like, for example, if you turn a knob up, it might increase one parameter but decrease another one at the same time. Or it might increase one in a linear fashion but another one in an exponential fashion. And this is helpful to abstract things and simplify things. Like on my controller here, I have one control for reverb. That's it. And that controls the depth of the reverb and the time, how long it reverberates. And I think maybe something else too. I can't remember. But it's controlling multiple things, but I've simplified it so I only have to think about one control. So it's much faster, and I don't have to like dial in, reverb time, reverb dampening, reverb, depth or whatever. Like, it's just boiled down to one quick and easy control, so you can, just, quickly get to it. And you learn, I mean, yes, you're giving up possibilities then, right? Then, okay, now I can't do a really long reverb that's has low wetness, so it's like, low depth. But I mean, that you kind of have to make these choices if you want to simplify it and make it manageable in a kind of to perform with and to actually work with. So it's kind of, again, it's abstracting away the details. All right. So the next problem I'm sure all of us have faced is that we're not happy with the results. It's not good enough, right? We listen to our artistic heroes, and we're not even close, and it's we get discouraged, and it's this this kind of difference between our taste and our ability. And there's this Ira Glass interview. He's the This American Life guy, where he talks about this, and you could find it probably on YouTube or something. But he explains it in such a great way, where it's our taste outstrips our ability usually, right? It's like we know what's good, but we're not able to do it, and most of the time. Or a lot of times people give up and they stop making art, or they stop doing whatever because they get discouraged, right? They're comparing themselves, and what they're able to do just doesn't match up. And for me, I mean, I don't have the solution to that really, but one thing for me that has been really important is this idea of iteration. I'm gonna just take a drink. And this has helped me a ton. I mean, so basically I told you I started making music with this system with my friend. That was in 2012. And I've been working on the same system since then. And basically following this cycle. And I actually looked at another kind of side note. If you are doing stuff in software, in the box, whatever, I recommend using a version control system. I still use Subversion because it's simple and it does what I need. I don't need Git and branching and all this crap. I just need like a version history. So you can, I mean, that's useful because you can always go back and see what you did before, or sometimes you mess something up. You're like, oh crap. Like it was actually better like a month ago when I had it configured in this different way. I'm going to go back to see, how I did it then, sometimes things can drift as you're making changes, and then you listen to something old and you're like, wow, like that sounds way better than like what my system sounds like now. Like, why is that? And then you could go back and see like what you were doing back then. But I checked, where is it? Sorry, I have it here. I just like extracted some of the version history from my, how do I zoom in here? Isn't it control? Oh, here we go. So for the Reaper file that I was just looking at, I'm up to version 2869. So just to give you an idea. So like just actually today, I had some dynamic EQ thing on the master, but it didn't sound right, so I removed it. So like a lot of times, and this, I exported like a few hundred entries here just to show you, but it's a lot of times what I end up doing is like making a change and then changing it back, or I'll like increase sub bass by half a dB, and then the next version I revert that because it was like too much, or it's this subtle tuning and things like that. But really the point is like this cycle I think is key, which is, and it doesn't really matter what you're doing. I think this applies to all kinds of art. Is a practice, record the results, and then listen to it, and then I say and go for a walk, because that's what I do. And I find that walking somehow makes my brain work better. There's something about like the rhythmic motion I find to be really helpful. So I always go for a walk with my headphones and listen and take notes on my phone, and then I come back, using like a to-do list app or whatever. And then I come back and make adjustments based on those notes, and then practice again, and then continue the cycle over and over and over again. And I mean, to me, I've found that this cycle, you'll improve over time. Things will get better, and you'll start to get closer to where you want to be. And the other thing and again, and as a side note, I highly recommend using like reference tracks. I mean, this applies to music specifically, but collect music that you think sounds amazing, right? Keep a collection somewhere, and do side by side A/B comparison. Because if you're working in your own little world, it can sound great, because your ears get used to it, and you don't realize it, that your ears have shifted or adjusted. And it helps a lot to always have this kind of reference point to refer back to, so our ears don't start to drift off into some, other place that's. So yeah, I highly recommend this practice of iterating. Okay, now we're starting to get into this augmented creativity part, and the algorithmic stuff. So I developed this music system. Over time, added, drums, synths, bass, like more and more effects. It evolved, over time. And it was really fun to play with, and make music with my friend Jeremy. It was great fun, but I found that I always tended to do the same kind of stuff with it, right? Like I would always, I don't know, tend to put like a bass drum on the 1, for example, or a snare on the 3, and or the 2 and the 4, and I would just do these similar patterns a lot of time, and because we're human beings, we have habits, we have patterns, things that we're used to doing, and sometimes it's hard to break out of that. I mean, but there are many more possibilities out there, right? In this possibility space that I mentioned earlier, I was tending to just explore these certain corners that I was used to, or that kind of that I just habitually went to. And what I found was it's really fun, and a great way to break out of that is to take those controls. Remember those knobs that we had before that we picked out that we're using in our instrument, and just randomize them, basically. So what I ended up doing is I created a button on here on my controller that I could just said random, and I just pushed a button. It would randomize everything, all the controls at once. And that definitely breaks you out of your habits, and you end up finding new possibilities that you wouldn't normally find on your own. It basically throws you into new locations in that possibility space that you wouldn't normally explore. And again, I think this can apply to visual and design stuff too. Like imagine you have like a parametric system, so meaning like a system where you just have some sliders or whatever, that's controlling like a shape or a form, a visual form. Maybe you have something for color, you have something for like number of vertices, you have something for like thickness of the line, whatever. Like you could have a system like that, and maybe normally you tend to make the same kinds of things with it, but if you have this kind of randomization, then you can. It's almost like a slot machine or something. Like I would spend hours like sitting there just pressing the button over and over and over again, because it's like a endless novelty machine. Just constantly giving me more and more new stuff. So it's a great way to just break out of those habits and find new possibilities, basically. However, as we'll hear when we do the demo, it often doesn't sound good, because it's complete randomness is not really interesting, right? It just sounds like chaos. It's just too crazy. I mean, it's fun, and sometimes you'll get things that are useful, but a lot of times it's not useful. It's too chaotic, it's too crazy. So the way to deal with that is to essentially tune the randomness. So basically what that means is, you can make, instead of total randomness, you make some things more likely to happen, some things less likely to happen. You might prevent certain things from happening at all because you know it's just going to sound terrible. Like, maybe you have a synth that if it's pitched up 3 octaves, it's going to just be ear piercing. So you might hard code that constraint into the system. Say, okay, never put this synth up to 3 octaves because it sounds terrible. So you can start to basically shape it. I mean, you can imagine, like when it's pure randomness, it's almost like a block of marble or something like that, and you're kind of sculpting away at it to make it more shapely, to more reflect your preferences or your taste or whatever you're trying to create with that project. You can kind of, by adjusting the probabilities and the ranges and the constraints, you can kind of restrict again, in this possibility space language, like you can restrict the area that you're exploring to just a certain range, a certain area of that possibility space. So one way to do that, and this is kind of an aside, like a technical aside, but I store all my parameters as values between 0 and 1, basically as like floating point numbers, because it makes it a lot easier to work with them. I mean, you can take those numbers and then you can take that like 0 to 1 and kind of scale it to other number ranges, like for octaves, maybe it's like -3 up to +3 or something like that. Through using math, you can scale it up. But if you're dealing natively with numbers between 0 and 1, you can do stuff like this. Like basically, if you have let's say x is like a random number. Okay, so this is the normal case. If you say y equals x, then you're going to get an even distribution of numbers. Like you're going to get little numbers, you're going to get big numbers, all in a pretty even distribution. However, if you take a random number x and square it, you're going to get more smaller numbers. You're going to get numbers that tend to be smaller. So for example, when I'm randomizing reverb, for example, usually I want to have just a small amount of reverb, right? So in that case, I wouldn't just give it a random number. I wouldn't randomize it completely, because then I'm getting an equal number of times I'm going to get a lot of reverb versus a little reverb. But usually I want it to just be a little bit of reverb. So what you can do then is just square it, and then you will tend to get smaller values for that parameter. You can keep increasing these numbers. If you make it x to the third, for example, you tend to get even smaller numbers. I mean, you'll still get the full range. Like you'll still get the big value, like the huge reverb sometimes, but it'll be a lot less likely, basically. So you can kind of tune how likely something is to be a large value versus a small value in this way, if you're using values between 0 and 1. And it's also the inverse here. If you do take a random number and take it to like the 1/2 power, that makes it so you're going to tend to get larger values. So if you have a parameter that, I don't know, maybe just volume, for example, of like some element, like normally you want it to be towards, turned up, like, for the most part. But sometimes you might want it to be quiet. So in that case, usually you want a larger number, so you can take it to the 1/2 power, the 1/3 power, the 1/4 power, or whatever. So it's just a way of kind of tuning these random values to get, if sometimes you want smaller, sometimes you want larger values. And we'll look at some examples of this in the code. And this is just, basically what I ended up doing as I said before, I just had one random button. But eventually that grew into multiple randomization buttons that worked in different ways. And so each button had different constraints, different, probabilities, different weighting of the parameters like we were just looking at. So you can have different kind of algorithms for different scenarios or different projects, or what ended up being in my case was it's how I ended up creating this Fields OS radio show. So I did, some of you may know, but I did a radio show on Resonance Extra. There was a weekly radio show, and each week it was an hour of new music that was all algorithmically generated, and each week it was like a different style of music, or a different approach, or different genre. So, and basically I'd have like randomization functions for techno, for hip hop, drum and bass, and where I might restrict, like for techno, the tempo is always going to be like 130 something. There's always going to be a kick on, so it's a 4/4 pattern, and there's certain constraints built into that. So I would have multiple of these kind of algorithms or randomization functions that work in different ways. So, and again, it might be for a different project that you're doing, or for different use cases or whatever. And I can answer questions at the end, but I did have this awesome quote that I wanted to share, and it doesn't exactly relate to all of the presentation, but I think it's really important. And so my voice is tired, so maybe you guys can just read it, and I'll get a drink. But it's one of my favorite quotes. It's basically, the importance of doing your own thing, because, and not, trying to imitate what someone else is doing, because everyone has their own unique voice to contribute. And I think it's important, like it says, keep the channel open. Don't judge how good it is, or how valuable it is, or compare it to others, but you have your own thing, and do it to the best. So I just love this quote and wanted to share it. Yeah, thank you. I'll be performing tomorrow night at the Moon Palace, right? So I hope you guys can come out, and at least for the first few tracks, I'm going to push that button, and we'll see what happens.
Excellent.
Thank you.